This I'm going to read is from a chapter. Let's see. This chapter is called "Seeing the Light," and here in this chapter, she's really talking quite a bit about energy, um, which we'll discuss in a bit. And one of the things that she relates this to is sort of how mind turns kind of the illusory nature of existence, or the sheer variety of perceptions, which are like illusory reflections of the moon and water from Jigme Lingpa's Longshan Yintik, that we read in the beginning. In a way, Leslie is using the hologram as an example for consciousness and the nature of reality. And part of this has to do with seeing energy as opposed to seeing form. So the first part is about hologram, and the second part is learning to see energy and how essential that is to see things in terms of energy, not form. So for Leslie, she used to tell us that it was very important that when we start to be able to see things more in those terms, we're really actually able to progress on the path. And it's actually a sign that we are progressing, that when we look out at the world and we see things, that we're not seeing things as actual forms, but actual energy, as opposed to as she put it, these are her words, the average man in the street who will see things in very concrete, rigid, and black and white terms. Yeah. And many of us start out there. I used to be like this as well. So what's interesting about energy and our awareness of energy is that things start becoming profound and possible when we begin to shift how we are seeing. Yeah, and it's not just a seeing with our eyes, but it's a seeing through the lens of awareness, seeing the fine-tune, the subtlety that is the true nature of all things. Yeah. So here she likens a metaphor for existence, the hologram. Holographic art is done with laser beams. It appears to be quite real, yet it is complete illusion. To make a hologram of an object, the holographic artist begins with a small photo of the object. The photo must show all of the shading to give the impression of volume and depth and to create three-dimensional lifelike quality. The resulting hologram will project an exact replica of the image in the photo, not a flat and two-dimensional one, as is the piece of paper in which the photo is printed, but as though the object is in three-dimensional space, like a sculpture. So let's imagine that the holographic image is in front of us, and together we are going to take a walk around it. It is life-size, and we can walk right up to it. Since it looks quite solid and real, we walk around it and discover that it has a back and a front. It is realistic in every way and could be mistaken for an actual object frozen into stillness. And yet, if we try to touch it, we find there is nothing there but colored light. Since it looks so realistic, it is a bit of a shock to discover there is actually nothing of substance there at all, just the air in which it floats. So the analogy of the hologram is a wonderful way to illustrate the illusion of life and the truth about the ground of our being, the unified state. Life appears to be solid and real, and yet it is as insubstantial as the hologram. This world that we all regard as real and solid is a dream, fashioned from vibrations of that colored light. In a hologram, all that is really there in actuality is the air, which in our analogy equates to a more unified source of presence. But with the hologram, we tend not to notice the air. It seems to be hidden. So seeing energy does not literally mean seeing the different energies through our physical eyes, although it can. Being a seer means perceiving in some subtle way the reality which is usually beyond the senses. We grasp much more about the dynamic of circumstances when we're able to witness and perceive what sort of energy is playing out in the world around us. For example, we see how our own personality patterns, as well as others, are involved in daily interactions and dramas. So it takes an expansion of our awareness and a deeper understanding of what we are observing to see in such a way. By witnessing and by being fully present, we perceive things taking place energetically below the surface of any and all situations. So I will stop here. So she goes on in this lovely chapter to talk about how we actually are also seeing the display of creativity in this life playing itself out in the forms that we take to be real, and then superimpose like transparencies. Do you remember those transparencies from school? The teacher used to have this big machine with an arm and a light, a projector that would shine onto the screen, and then they would have these markers and they would put things on top of each other. This is kind of how life appears to us. And so part of the spiritual path or the path of meditation is sort of pulling away all of those transparency layers. So we're just getting to the purity of the light itself, the thing that we probably rarely notice as much as the images. Interesting, yeah? So the quantum world, quantum physics, quantum mechanics also tells us that the nature of all things are vibratory, vibrations, energetic. Nothing is as static as it seems. Certainly we know intellectually things aren't as permanent, that impermanence is, one of the great foundations of Buddhism. So the name of the book, Ash, yes, is called The Marriage of Spirit, Enlightened Living in Today's World by Leslie Temple-Thurston, and also with Brad Laughlin. So I don't know if this is something that any of you have experienced. When I'm going about my day, of course, I'm living in the world and navigating form. I'm navigating objects. I'm navigating other cars when I'm driving. There's a good practical reason to see things in their form state, of course. Yeah. And yet, it has a very practical sense to it. Wisdom, however, when we are cultivating a view, and here we're really talking about a realization, a perception of how reality truly is. We're actually talking about seeing things as arising at independence upon causes and conditions, and also being supple, being fluid, much more than it might seem in the moment. And this can be true with objects, but it can also be true with somebody's attitude, maybe something that triggers us. There's no shortage of that in the media these days. And so seeing things as energies and our own reactivity to those things in terms of energies. Our opinions aren't as fixed perhaps as we might think they are. And so part of what Leslie is telling us here with this is really to start turning the mind into something workable, seeing its ultimate nature as supple, as more fluid, that our beliefs may tell us. And this is very important for progress, on the path of meditation. So first, the view of energy, the view of seeing things as energy, actually begins to lay the foundation for a path of transformation, as opposed to things are static, unchanging, as much as it may feel like they are, especially difficult things. No, the view says all things are impermanent, and the view of seeing all things as energy in motion and in interaction with their environment helps to lay a foundation for what is possible, for what we experience as being possible through our practice. Does that make sense? We could say that it's belief. If we don't believe this to be the case, then we have a little bit further to go until we realize, wow, there is capacity here in my consciousness. Consciousness, anyway, naturally unfolds in the direction that its tendencies push it. Does that make sense? This is the nature of all things that are sentient, that are alive. Consciousness unfolds in the direction in which its tendencies impel it to go. This is true with viruses. Everything seeks fruition and seeks its ultimate existence, including mind states. This is why rumination can be so hard to sort of back up out of or move through without getting stuck. It's a frequency of consciousness that we're experiencing. So, number one, the view of seeing all things as energy begins the path of transformation. It's a good foundation for it. And two, when we can experience it, not just know it to be true, then we start to see two things. One, the possibilities. And two, we start experiencing our capacities to become more fluid, to become more flexible. It doesn't mean we're not grounded, because that too is important. We're talking about balancing energies, and some energies are grounding. They're stable. The other thing is, in these traditions, and certainly this is true in Vajrayana Buddhism especially, is to see that all things exist on a continuum of subtle energy to gross energy. And when I say gross energy, I don't mean something disgusting. I mean something manifested or apparently manifested. So a rock clearly is hard. If you bump your head against a doorpost, that's hard too, right? But not everything that is material is hard. So we see a continuum from subtle to gross. This is also true in our meditation practice. We are starting in meditation with the gross level. We're starting with the physical body, the senses. Even our thoughts are considered thought forms. They're considered gross level thoughts. And the more the mind settles, the more that we are calming, relaxing into a place of calm abiding, what we call shamatha, or single pointed consciousness that allows us to peacefully abide in the moment. The more that happens, the more we are accessing and realizing the subtlety of mind. And the more that we are able to experience fully the subtlety of mind, the more we start finding even more subtle layers of awareness. And as we experience even more subtle layers of awareness, we start going, wow, I am peeling a layer of this really amazing onion. In this case, it's a sweet onion, I think, if there is such a thing. Because what is at the heart of this onion, this metaphorical onion anyway, and so I wish you would stop talking about onions, is this very profound, extraordinarily refined quality, the ground of being that Leslie talks about, this sort of source of our vitality, the source of our wakefulness that is not affected, disrupted, or stained by the things of this world that causes suffering. And it is always what we can call pure, always unaffected, and simply bearing witness. This is the good news. This is why sometimes people say, well, Buddhism seems pretty negative, right? All of life is suffering. Well, what's the point? Here is the point. So that subtle to gross quality, this is also true in other spiritual traditions. So, for example, in the yoga system, and yes, I'm noticing this conversation about Vidalia onions here in the chat. They are sweet. Thank you. Ruth likes them too. Um, this notion of prana. Yeah. What is prana? Prana, this sense that within our breath, it's not just oxygen. Why? Because we're able to understand that in a very subtle way, the breath itself and oxygen, quote unquote, itself contains things that are other than oxygen. It contains these very deep, subtle qualities of vitality. The process itself is one of vitality. Breathing in, we wake up, we oxygenate the body, surely, the brain as well. But we're also receiving very subtle forms of nourishment as we breathe. And I knew somebody who used to fast for long periods many, many years ago. She was a German woman. And when she would fast, she wouldn't even drink anything for like days on end, which, can be dangerous. But she would say, I don't need anything because when I'm breathing in prana, when I'm meditating on prana, I'm actually getting the nutrients from the air around me. Now, I don't exert myself. I don't exert a lot of energy, but she's nourishing herself with the vitality that is present in prana. This is ancient subtle physiology here. In Taoism, the notion of qi, of winds, of energy, if you will, of pathways, meridians through the body, profound profound process, if you will, that gives rise to either good health and well-being or ill health and poor sense of being in the world. Mana is a Native American term that also means the vitality present within the breath. It is kind of the energy that makes things happen. So some native tribes or indigenous tribes, this is a very strong belief as well. And then in Tibetan Buddhism, Lung, L-U-N-G, interestingly, which is probably taken somehow from the Sanskrit because Sanskrit contains some origins of English. So lung being lung, it's spelled the same way, lung being the place of wind, of breath. Lung also means this quality of vitality, of winds. So when I do these very kind of esoteric Sa Lung exercises, Sa Lung, Sa is exercise, and Lung is that quality of wind. So it means wind exercise or energy practice is another way, where I do mudras with them. I'll do percussive breathing, visualize certain things, and then we'll sound the tone of a mantra. And I've been learning this for the last few years from a teacher here in the Newton area. Very profound practices, tantric practices. So that's the point of these things, though, is to circulate energy through breath, through sound, through vibration. And so when we start seeing, mind, body, what we might call spirit, or if it's not spirit, we might call Buddha nature, that these aren't very distinct separate things, but there is this continuum of subtlety to grossness. This notion of frequency. So Leslie used to always say, fear is a frequency. Love is a frequency. They vibrate sort of at different rates. And it's interesting when we meditate and we're having a really deep meditation and we're really feeling that sense of lightness and clarity and easefulness, relaxation, we are actually, quote unquote, vibrating at a higher frequency. This has been borne out through studies of the brain of brainwaves, what are called gamma brainwaves, the fastest of the brainwaves. The slowest, the deepest brainwaves are delta. So if you kind of think about an equalizer, a sound equalizer on a stereo, you have brainwaves that are rather sound waves of the bass that do this. The flow of these things is very slow and deep. And so you get these low, as Jim knows well, as a bass player, you get these deep resonating tones. The frequencies are lower. And that's one of the ways that we get these low frequencies in music and in sound. Same thing with the delta. And those are operant when we are in deep, deep sleep. And then the theta are a little bit faster. Instead of being these long, deep waves, they're kind of a little bit faster, but still considered low frequency. And usually these are operating when we're in a dream state, when we're sleeping and we're dreaming. The referent of our awareness is internal still. So we have these worlds that we're creating as we're sleeping. Still very, very relaxed state usually, but a little bit more active. And then we come to the alpha, which is where some of the mindfulness studies have focused on alpha brainwaves, sort of calm flowing thoughts, wakeful state, very much at ease, very relaxed, seem to be sort of the mid-range of frequency, but still a very easeful process. So when we're feeling really good and we're feeling a sense of well-being and comfort, and maybe we're spending time with a loved one and it just feels really safe and loving, then the alpha waves are usually predominant. Now, they're all operating simultaneously. It's just which one is predominating. So we're not jumping from one to the next. And then we get to the beta waves, which are slightly faster. This is like working consciousness, intentional responsiveness to the outside world, conversation, social, that kind of thing. Certainly more active. And interestingly, in the beta range, we also start seeing things like the unease, right? Because it is more active. The amygdala, this part of the brain that is reactive to fight, flight, or freeze, is usually activated here as well. But it's not a bad brainwave. It's also something that can be operant when we're being creative, crunching numbers, or being practical, thinking about things. And then we reach the gamma, which is the fastest of the brain waves. They're so fast. And this is where these waves will aggregate information from the rest of the brain, and then channel it into some kind of response or awareness. Usually it has to do with the hypothalamus, and then that triggers the pituitary, and that triggers the adrenal glands. There's this whole axis, this chain of events that happen very quickly. So these brain waves are very, very fast. And actually, scientists don't even know where they come from. But they have measured them, but they don't know like how they're produced or arrive, and how sophisticated they are in a very complex set of neural networks in the brain, and then making some kind of coherence out of all this information. Now, there are other higher frequency that are part of the gamma range. Hypergamma, I think there are 3 they've discovered that are even faster. But the point here, isn't so much the neuroscience of all of this, but it's that even scientists are aware of the fact that the brain is in constant flux, that the mind itself has these capacities to reshape itself, and that the thinking mind, our cognition, our beliefs, all of these things will impact the physiology of the body. So this notion that Buddhism brings in about the suppleness of mind is very consistent with neuroscience and with the structure of the brain. There's good reason to say, wait a minute, this isn't just some hocus pocus that we're doing when we practice. There is data here. There is scientific evidence saying that all of these things that these teachings are telling us, despite that they're being in with different nomenclature, different language, are being actually borne out in studies. And I'm telling you this because belief matters. I'm telling you this so that it's like, I wonder if he's right or wrong. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm not sure. Consciousness itself is impossible to find. The brain itself has not been proven to be the source of consciousness. There's no data at all to show that but it's a processor of consciousness. So in many of these traditions that we practice, consciousness arises from the heart. This is the source, if you will. And yet it is also ubiquitously present throughout every process of the body as sentient beings. Part of what we're talking about here is a conservation of our vitality, a conservation of our energy. Imagine living your life in such a way that you're always conscious of where's my energy going and how might I conserve this energy so I'm not just throwing it out into this direction or that direction, but really holding it. This is one of the benefits, I think, of retreat and more long-term meditation. You arise from the cushion or the yoga mat. Maybe it's from a place where you're doing Tai Chi or Qigong, but you're arising with this sense of flow and clarity and holding your energy, your vitality as this beautiful, precious quality that you give to others or you give to tasks very intentionally and with some flow, with some effortless flow. Effortlessness doesn't have to just be stillness, but there can be this sort of notion of suppleness in our actions where we're skillful, but we're also at ease, we're relaxed. This is the nature of what awareness is, what is possible through awareness. Yeah. So how do we conserve that energy? We're going to practice that in a moment. We're almost there. I had one other thing I was going to say. Yeah. Oh, this is interesting. I've got so much I could say about this. But we'll talk about this again. But one of the points is we want our energy to be liberated energy. Does that kind of make sense? That the energy of freedom isn't that one that is narrowly channeled into a conduit that only allows for one thing. But largely freeing our vitality intentionally through practice so that the emotional patterning, our limitations, the things we're not proud of that we carry, our imprinting. Yes, fine, they can be there. But our energy is flowing, is basically free of the impacts of those things. This is often, if any of you have experienced depression in particular, and you've been in meditation and you've found some relief from the depression, or maybe it's anxiety or some other thing, where you're like, wow, I'm feeling like I'm free in this moment. Part of that is because that freedom is already present. That energy of freedom is already there. It's just you've actually created causes and conditions for all that other stuff to settle, to fall away in a space where you feel safe, in a space where you feel like you really do have some refuge in this moment, because in this present moment, there is no problem. If there is one, it's a hologram in this moment. And I may get up and then I go outside and I talk to somebody and a problem arises, fine. But that it's worth sitting, it's worth cultivating, because you will be different when you get up and go out there, and you will probably respond differently, as opposed to just continuing with this momentum of energy that is channeled and frantic. And that's when we usually react. That's usually when reactivity happens. So we want to really just slow things down to be, what the Buddha said, not too tight, not too loose, but just in perfect balance. What Leslie used to call impeccability here. She used to talk about that being just this perfect balance of our energy, wakeful, restful, intentional, and aware. Yeah. I think part of that is that transparency leads to fearlessness, that being authentic, that we're not having to hide anymore. Like the analogy that we discussed earlier, walk into a post office and there's an eruption in there. It's easy to now want to shrink away and become invisible. And I think part of that is natural, right? The fight, flight, or freeze response, the protective need. But if we are really sort of rooted in a sense of clear truth of the situation, we're seeing the energy of what's unfolding, as opposed to, there's two guys, it looks like they're going to start coming to blows, right? Seeing, to Jane's contribution earlier, I'm not seeing this person as a bad person, but I'm seeing the suffering there. Because that's part of it too. It's not just seeing the energy, but it's seeing the nature of the energy. This is what Leslie was talking about in this notion that that's the discernment, that there is suffering energy here. There is hurt. There is deeply buried pain in these people who are wanting to fight each other. It's escalated to that point. The truth of the situation, that's what matters and can help. That's why I say transparency is a feature of fearlessness, because truth, seeing things clearly, as opposed to in a reactive way, becomes that refuge. Whether it's speaking truth to power, social justice, or just walking into a business and seeing something erupt there, as opposed to reacting with fear, which is natural. Again, we all have that initial thing. But if we lean in with truth, with awareness, the awareness itself is not affected by what we're encountering, but everything else can be. Yeah. You're working with your own process to become an environment others can experience. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, a lot of this is collective as well, which is even more important, that we are practicing regularly and that we are stabilizing ourselves in a practice, so that we're not taking the bait constantly of everything that's happening in the world, but we're able to meet the world with clarity, with freedom, as opposed to being impacted by the suffering of the world, intruding on your inner space. And then now you're part of the collective. So it really matters. It really matters. Believe me, how you show up to any encounter that's public or in a group, you're not a closed system, but you are a transmitter of energy. So just think of that next time you're in a situation like that. And also, to Peter's point, if I'm showing up and there's this thing unfolding, what can I bring to this that's helpful, whether I say something or not? What kind of consciousness do I cultivate? Consciousness facilitates energy. Energy, in turn, facilitates forms of consciousness. It's a feedback loop. So remembering, this is the way things are. Things happen this way. So how can I be intentional? And what does my heart tell me is needed here?